what we wanted to accomplish here was have a very natural, very grounded, pun intended, discussion with some farmers, and not the usual suspects, but people that you might not get to hear from on a daily basis or when you normally attend these types of conferences. So it's something a bit new that we've done here at the CFA AGM. We're going to test it out this year. I'm sure they're going to do a fabulous job. And all of them are farmers. I'm not a farmer. I'm a staff person with the CFA. I will tell you, my agricultural experience extends to a short stint at a thoroughbred horse ranch shoveling shit. I did that for a little while. I really liked that, actually. Then I worked for a seed company driving around Ontario for a little while, delivering corn and soybean seeds until, and I've told this story before, but just so you all know, until I lost my car keys in the middle of a cornfield with no cell reception and crawled around on my hands and knees for a couple hours trying to find them. That's when I realized that maybe farming wasn't right for me. Maybe I should stick with the suit and stay here in Ottawa and stick to my knitting. So I'm not a farmer. I have very limited farming background, but that's why we're here to hear from our colleagues here today. So what I'm going to do is ask them each to introduce themselves, who they are, where they're from, a little bit about themselves, and maybe one word or phrase or something that you think epitomizes farming where you're from. Lori, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. East to west. Oh no, a little bit. Anyway, hi, I'm Lori Robinson from PEI, about 7 kilometers from the foot of the bridge that lets the rest of Canada join Canada's smallest province. We farm soybeans, barley, forages. Spent 25 years being a potato producer and packer. A phrase that I would say epitomizes agriculture and PEI would be opportunistic and pressure packed.
Okay, I like that. Very good. Mackenzie.
My name is Mackenzie Seidel. I am here with APAS as a young leader. I currently live in southern Saskatchewan, where me and my partner farm about 7,000 acres of mostly lentils, durum, and canola. Before I lived down there, I grew up on a certified seed farm in the northern part of Saskatchewan. And when I say northern, I mean by population, not by geography. If you've ever looked at Saskatchewan, we live right along the forest edge, and it's definitely not the northern part of the province. But so yeah, certified seed farm where we grow a lot of barley, a lot of oats for seed. We used to grow some peas for seed, but we've been struggling with some disease, and then canola. So I've been lucky to experience a lot of different climates in Saskatchewan, let's say. And farming in southern Saskatchewan, if I had to choose one word, it would probably be challenging.
Challenging. Okay. I'm sure that would apply to many farming regions across Canada.
Exactly, yeah.
Et Florence.
Oui, bonjour. My name is Florence Lefebvre-Saint-Arnaud. I'm from Quebec, of course. I am the co-owner of a family farm where we grow organic fruits and vegetables. We mostly sell our stuff with CSA, so we're providing organic baskets, and we've been doing this for the past 35 years. I co-own the farm with my family, so with my mother, my father, and my 2 brothers also. And I suggest you keep your headphones ready, because I might navigate between French and English.
Wait.
This is a challenge for me, and I'm loving it.
On va parler un peu français cet après-midi. Oui, très bien. Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Bodner. I farm with my wife in Abbotsford. We do mixed vegetables, certified organic. We sell most of our produce direct to consumer through, likewise, a subscription program. We do a couple of crops, particularly rhubarb and squash for wholesale markets. We've been doing that for 20 years. I'm also the president of Organic BC and a professor of agriculture at the University of the Fraser Valley.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to the panel. Thank you for being here. I was thinking, what kind of a farmer panel would this be if we didn't actually start by talking about the weather, right? So let's do that. Maybe Lori, you had a bit of a storm out east recently. People are still
digging out.
Still digging out from that.
Yeah.
How are things going? What would you say is sort of the spirit or the climate of farmers when it comes to weather right now in your province?
Yeah, I mean, outside of like a recent storm, like 2025, we had like the worst drought in 100 years. Season started off great, and then July came along, and it like we really had no rain for 2.5 months. 3 years ago, we had the worst hurricane on record in PEI. So, in the last 3 or 4 years, weather has been a challenge. Mother Nature likes to throw things at us and see what resilience is like. So what we're finding is that we need to become more adaptable to climate change and some of the changing weather patterns. Take my farmer hat off for a minute and get a plug in for the PEI Federation of Agriculture, which I'm the first vice president, but released a document recently that it was called Pathway 2040, talked about economic targets, talked about GHG emission reductions, and the final section was about climate adaptation. And, what are some of the things that we can do as farmers to adapt to the climate change that we're seeing? Like we focused on soil health, making better use of our inputs, off-calf money to do cover crops, nitrogen management. So, we're trying to use all the tools in the toolbox to adapt to climate as it changes and trying to stay ahead of Mother Nature, which, as I said earlier, is pressure packed.
You gave a shout out to the PI Federation of Agriculture, and they didn't even cheer for you. There was no support from the audience. What's going on over there, guys? Yes, there we go. That's what I wanted to hear. Nice. You talked about adaptation. So, Chris, BC, so floods, fires, it's been pretty hectic over the last several years. When you talk to your colleagues, when you talk to other farmers in BC, do they kind of have this, we take in this one sort of storm at a time, or are people thinking about the future and sort of about how they can adapt to climate variability and climate change?
Yes.
Yes.
And no. No, it depends who you talk to on what day. I think the thing right now is that we've had like not just drought, but we've had catastrophic events. And so it's the point when you wake up in the summer and you can see the sky, you're grateful because the next day could be completely smoke filled. And I talk to producers who are constantly on the ready to evacuate their properties if there's a fire. I went into work at the university just a couple of months ago, and my colleague looks at me and says, "Does this give you the same pit in your stomach anxiety as we had 5 years ago or 4 years ago with the flooding?" And I was like, "Yeah." And what do you know? The next day, I couldn't drive to work because the entire valley was flooded between the farm and my office. And so these are the sorts of things that bring about anxiety. And I know, if we can look at sectors, like 25% of BC's hog producers stopped producing after the floods in 2021. So you have some people who are just saying, I'm sort of at the end of what I can do, and they're exiting the sector. You have other people who are trying to hang on, like tree fruit producers, or that have gone through multiple years of poor crops and then losing everything for an entire season. And so I think people are feeling really challenged as to how do we move forward. And it's not something that anyone can do on their own. And the best advice I'd ever had as a farmer was from a colleague when we went through flooding in 2017 and lost most of our crops in the middle of June. And he said, the biggest mistake you'll ever make as a farmer is to not ask for help. And I think that's where our producer organizations are really helpful, because they can move along preparedness and resources that we as farmers are just too overwhelmed to do on our own. And that's really, what we've seen is resiliency and community. That can get us so far, but it's been a tough slog the last few years.
And how does that resonate for you, Florence? Qu'est-ce qui se passe au Québec?
I think I could say we're exactly at the same place, because I feel like we're going from flood to drought one day after another, and it constantly keeps going like this. So anxiety is I think it's a big threat, actually. And we've talked about priorities for the past 2 days. We've talked about economy, but less about mental health and like our wellness as producers. And I think this is something we have to address and we have to keep track on, because this might be like one of the biggest threats ahead of us, I think, because extremes are constant and they're not gonna, like, it's not gonna get better, unfortunately. I don't think so. So I think we're gonna have to address this.
Maybe you could just elaborate for us for a second a little bit about community-supported agriculture. I'm not sure
Yep.
how many people are familiar with about that model. And
Yes.
yeah,
So actually, and this part is the headphone part, guys. En fait, l'agriculture soutenue par la communauté, so CSA, ce sont des paniers bio, des abonnements que les gens contractent en début de saison, idéalement pendant l'hiver. Donc, en ce moment, à Campanipol, on est en période d'abonnement pour la saison d'été 2026. And I'm gonna talk a little slower. Alors voilà, les clients s'abonnent pour la saison d'été et chaque semaine par la suite, de juin à novembre dans notre cas, ils vont recevoir un panier bio rempli de fruits, légumes certifiés biologiques qui sont produits à la ferme ou qu'on achète via d'autres fournisseurs aussi certifiés biologiques pour offrir un maximum de diversité. Donc, comme je le disais d'entrée de jeu, c'est notre 35e saison de panier bio au Jardin Bio Campanipol en Mauricie. Vous comprendrez que j'ai grandi avec la ferme comme la ferme a grandi avec moi. J'étais pas très grande il y a 35 ans. Mais c'est quand même un modèle qui permet d'avoir un contact direct avec le consommateur,
Oui.
qui permet aussi d'étaler un peu les préoccupations, puis d'aller chercher ce support-là. On parlait de support dans nos organisations, mais je pense que c'est intéressant aussi de pouvoir sensibiliser la clientèle, de tenir un discours qui soit réaliste, pas défaitiste, mais qui soit réaliste pour que les gens soient au fait de nos préoccupations et qui puissent aussi contribuer à maintenir un certain niveau de wellness.
okay, merci beaucoup. Mackenzie, so we heard Lori talked about soil health in PEI. I know that's something that you're very seized with. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about sort of your role and what you're doing and sort of how soil health is a big part of how farmers in Saskatchewan are adapting to, changing weather and climate conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for this question because it's something that I love to talk about, and I think it's becoming very popular and also a very good time for it with the bill that's in front of the Senate right now. So I work as a precision agronomy lead. So that's basically a fancy title for I work with variable rate. 90% of variable rate work that I do is fertility related. The other 10% would be soil amendments, seeding rates, stuff like that. And the whole idea behind the variable rate for people in southern Saskatchewan, which is where I primarily work, I work across 7 locations, which cover the whole south of the province, I guess, is not necessarily just a reduction in price per acre for fertilizer, but just a better return on investment of that fertilizer or crop inputs in general. So that's one thing that I always start meetings off with producers or when I'm doing educational talks at our locations is that variable rate's not necessarily going to reduce your fertilizer. Sometimes it's just taking it from an eroded knoll and putting it in an area that's actually going to make sense. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're putting less fertilizer. It just means you're putting it in better spots. So it's a very fun job. It maybe is. I try and say it's different day to day, but I'm doing the same thing just on different farms, and no farm is the same, let alone the field, right? So it's quite challenging in times of high input prices, low precipitation. Southern Saskatchewan has been in a drought for 7 to 10 years, depending on where you are. So people are very cognizant of the money that they're spending on their inputs. So variable rate is a little bit of an investment at the beginning of it because it takes a lot to set it up, at least the system that we use. So I guess to speak on that, we use something that focuses more on the soil characteristics. So I think I've heard it talked about a bit, but SWOT maps, I'm sure lots of people are very familiar with that, but I would say the 2 main ones would be SWOT maps and an NDVI-based variable rate. system. And the one that I like to focus on is soil characteristics, because if you've ever heard the saying that we owe everything we have to the top 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains, I think that basing decisions on fertility and seeding rates should be decided by what's going on in the soil versus what's growing above it. Because sometimes, those satellite-based images with heavy biomass can show weeds. So you don't really want to fertilize those weeds. But anyway, that's a whole different soapbox. But in terms of soil health, I think variable rate fits in really well with soil health, because it's creating both economic and environmental sustainability on a farm. And I guess just to speak on soil health and how it fits into the bill a little bit, we have started working on.
So this is Bill S-230, which is before the Senate, developing a national soil health strategy.
Yeah, exactly. But we started working with a different soil test called the Haney test, which I'm not sure if people are familiar with it in here. It's developed by Dr. Rick Haney, who's a part of Regen Ag Lab down in Nebraska. He works alongside Dr. Lance Gunderson. If you're a podcast person, they have incredible podcasts that talk about soil health and the tests that they do. And I would highly recommend them if you're interested in that space. But basically, we've started kind of replacing some of our, I'll call them traditional or standard soil tests that look at maybe just your physical soil health property or your physical soil properties and your plant available nutrients. And this test looks at a lot more soil health indicators, things like your soil respiration, how much carbon's in your soil, and it gives you an insight into how your microbes are cycling those nutrients and how you can maybe increase some of these soil health factors to get nutrient cycling a little bit better so that you don't have to rely on synthetic fertilizer or synthetic nutrients as much. And it's been a really fun way to kind of tag that in with variable rate as well. And I would say, if I were to give any advice to the people looking at the bill, I guess, in front of them,
Well, I'm so glad you're going to say that. We happen to be appearing before the Senate tomorrow morning, actually. So
okay, we'll
you
get your pen and paper
on
out here. I'm just kidding. So the two things that I would mention one would be just to include some kind of flexibility in that strategy, because I've seen it rolled out before in our province, programs and such that almost penalize early adopters of these soil health practices and stuff like that. So I would hope to see them included somehow in this strategy. And then the second part of that would be to make sure that people that are wanting to start with soil health on their journey would be to make sure that they have a baseline of where their farm is starting. So you can throw all these different practices at your farm and your fields, and if you don't have a way of tracking those soil health indicators, how are you going to know whether they're making a positive or a negative impact on that? So whether that's done with the Haney test or some other soil health test or indicator, I think that's really important to have a baseline or a benchmark that you can follow throughout the years.
I saw Senator Robinson walk in, the chair of the Agriculture Committee. So I'm just going to pass on my appearance tomorrow morning. Mackenzie's going to take our place and testify. I hope that's okay. Lori, how's this resonating for you? You've got, what is that? No? Oh, yeah, too bad. I tried. Lori, how does this resonate for you? So you're a farmer. Your family also owns a crop input supply company as well, right? So, are you seeing a lot of changes in sort of input prices right now that are having an impact on farms, on farmers, and on your clients, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I think all across the country, like we talk about higher input prices, like as one of the many things that makes our economics that much more difficult. In PEI, we only have access to 3 major kind of like fertilizer and crop input companies, and so we become, as farmers, we're like, there's not a lot of negotiation on your price, or we become price takers in a margin business that we don't have a lot of control over. So then we start looking at things at the farm level, like maybe extending rotations, like, and again, back to soil health and precision agriculture and SWOT maps. And, so we're looking at other ways to increase productivity while knowing that we need to use a certain amount of crop inputs and fertilizers, but we also have to look at other mechanisms and use all the tools in the toolbox to be able to, use our fertilizers and our crop inputs more efficiently, or take advantage of cover cropping, or like say longer rotations, looking at different crop varieties in rotations, breaking up pest cycles. Something like soybeans and potatoes, they share a lot of the same kind of put a different crop in between in your rotation to break up some of those pests. And we're seeing lower input costs in the crop protections world. But I mean, we're far from not being able to grow without some of these inputs. And as they continue to get more expensive, I think we get more creative about the ways that we reduce the inputs by some of the things that we're doing in the field and less about some of the things that we're putting on the crops.
Oh, interesting. Can you give us a couple of examples of some?
Like what, I mean, I think, I guess in some of the off-calf programming, we're doing nitrogen management where we're using, slow release fertilizers, or we're doing banding on some of our equipment so that we're not kind of over fertilizing areas where crops are not growing, or I talk about rotation and breaking up pest cycles, things like that. So, kind of looking at our entire rotation, whether it's 3 or 4, however many years, as an entire system, rather than, in PEI, where potatoes are so prominent. When we were growing potatoes, a lot of the focus of everything was about the potato crop and some of the other crops that were growing in the rotation that affects the potato crops. But now, we're looking at other crops that can add to the bottom line. We're not growing potatoes anymore, but we rent land out for potatoes. So they're still in our rotation, and we still have to look at the overall system of how we farm it, kind of in the length of the rotation and not just one year specifically.
Okay. We would be remiss if we didn't cover off some market dynamics as a general subject. I mean, we talked a lot about at this event, market diversification. It's a key priority for the Government of Canada. I'm curious, Chris, from your perspective, whether you see market diversification as an opportunity in the organic sector or more broadly for agriculture. Like, what does it look like in BC for you where you're farming?
Yeah, so the thing that's particular about BC is we do a lot of things, and even our largest sector is small in comparison to provinces from Alberta through to Quebec. And so we have a very small agricultural land base, 4% of British Columbia is arable land, and 1% of that is prime agricultural soil. So it does create some challenges in terms of how do we create economies of scale. But we do have, from the organic side, what we are looking at is, I think organic is really a value added to the larger agricultural sector. And so we do grow a lot of blueberries in British Columbia, and I would say that we overproduce blueberries. And at the same time, during the peak of our blueberry season, we import 5 times as many organic blueberries into Canada as we're producing. And so we can see areas where we have market demand. And we see in organic in general, we see year over year growth in demand, like consumer demand, but most of that is being filled through imports. And so where we have, particularly in horticultural crops, producers that are struggling with the pricing that they're getting paid, there's a significant opportunity for them to transition to organic. And likewise, we have, like with food diplomacy, we can produce far more food than we can consume as 40 million people in Canada. And with needing to diversify our markets, most of the production, horticultural production in British Columbia is focused on the US, and the US has some of the lowest common denominators in terms of pesticide permissions. And so when we're looking at accessing other markets, the organic sector has something to offer in terms of other inputs that are accepted. And I know that as a blueberry producer, he has a 20-acre block. So he's a conventional producer, but he has a 20-acre block that he farms completely differently from the rest of his crop, because that's harvested and it goes directly to Japan, because they have, they don't allow glyphosate, for example, in the production. And so he's completely changed his production practices for this 20-acre block. And that he's doing that individually, but we see a lot of opportunity where we could better coordinate the sector to access new markets. So I think that like we have food diplomacy, that we have countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, who are surrounded by hostile neighbors who are looking for stable, safe food supply. On the West Coast, we need to look there. Like we're at a disadvantage because we don't have access to the same distribution markets that the rest of Canada does. But I think across Canada, we have an opportunity to look at as we diversify what markets we can access. We also have to look at, are there changes to our, and I think that that's something where organic can bring something to the table. And that's what we're doing right now in planning like more trials of inputs that are recognized and allowed in Europe and Asian countries, for example. It'll benefit us as organic producers to make sure, because there's a lot of products that don't work that are sold. And if you're getting your advice from the salesperson at the input company, that's not always the best place to go. So we need independent trials of some of these products, but that is something that can also benefit other producers as well in accessing new markets. The big challenges right now for organic is that like we don't have a national organic strategy. It's a big risk, like a 3-year transition process. And so this is what we're going to be doing in the next little while, is approaching retailers, for example, who say that they want to carry more organic, but as producers, like we're the ones who've taken on all the risk mitigation factors. So we've had to conform to Canada GAP standards. We've had to pay those fees. We have to pay our organic certification fees. So we're carrying all the costs and all the obligations to access these markets. But a lot of those markets aren't contributing back to the farmers in terms of helping to get product to market. And so that's something we're hoping will be taken up by some of the retailers that we have in BC as a trial to see if they understand that this can increase their supply of BC product, are they willing to put some money behind that to de-risk the transition process, to put money into agrology advice for farmers who are going through that transition process, and to do trials of inputs that are going to support that market diversification.
And Florence, maybe from your perspective, because community support agriculture is very much a grow local, sort of buy local model, right? With the increased tension south of the border, are you seeing a significant change, an uptick in customers, or has that really changed your
We've
business?
seen one from the pandemic, I'd say, and then like 2020, 2021 were really good years for CSA.
Right.
But then it's like the economic reality struck back and everybody just like realized that I think people are not ready to get engaged, which means they're not willing to commit now for next season because financially it's harder. And I think people are a little, I'd say, prudent. So we feel like it's a little harder. Mais nos réalités économiques comme producteurs, comme productrices sont difficiles aussi parce que, ben, comme partout, l'augmentation des taux d'intérêt, l'inflation, le coût des intrants, on a les mêmes réalités et on assume ces hausses-là avec une clientèle qui est peut-être moins au rendez-vous. Donc, effectivement, même au niveau micro, dans la mise en marché de proximité, on va tenter de diversifier nos marchés aussi, nos canaux de vente, pour limiter les risques, pour les répartir en fait sur les différents canaux de mise en marché qu'on veut utiliser. Après, il y a toute la notion aussi d'éducation à la clientèle. J'ai l'impression qu'on ne met pas assez de l'avant la valeur ajoutée qu'on a comme agriculture canadienne, comme agriculture québécoise, avec les normes auxquelles on fait face, la main-d'œuvre aussi, on a des réalités différentes que les pays desquels on importe énormément. Est-ce qu'il n'y aurait pas des actions à mettre en place, des actions de communication pour informer la clientèle de tout ce qu'on fait de mieux et de différent qu'ailleurs, pour essayer de leur donner cette fierté-là de consommer local puis de choisir les produits d'ici? C'est c'est ma mission de vie, là, je pense. Là. Chez nous, les gens vont dire on va vous encourager. I don't want to be encouraged. I'm not selling chocolate. I want to be chosen.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to do there.
Okay. Another subject that I'd be interested to get your perspectives on that I think has come up a little bit during the course of the event here is succession planning and sort of how are we supporting the next generation of farmers. Mackenzie, you're a young farmer in Saskatchewan, so what does it look like for you personally and with some of your other young farmer colleagues in Saskatchewan? Are there any young farmers from Saskatchewan here? Can I?
No,
mean,
they're all gone.
Oh,
for
they're
the first
gone.
thing. They didn't want to
Okay.
hear me speak, so they've heard enough of that this week actually. So they took the option. I think it depends who you talk to. It's a little bit of organized chaos at times. I would say, I guess I'll tell my personal story after, but as a broader view, and I think this is probably what people hear all the time is that the sooner you start, the earlier it is, or sorry, the earlier you start, the easier it is. Even if that first conversation is, people don't want to start it and it's hard and it's awkward, the next time you go back to it, at least you're not starting from the very, very beginning. I have a lot of friends that are starting to transition into the main decision maker of the farm. And, the generation, whether it's their parents or their grandparents, maybe aren't quite ready to let it go. So sometimes there's a bit of miscommunication there and a little bit of hard feelings. So that's where it can be a little bit of a negative side and it can get a little bit, I guess the tension you can cut it with a knife at times on their farm. But there's a lot of businesses and people out there that help with that now. So even in Saskatchewan, I can think of probably out for a business and have helped successfully transition farms with minimal tension, I guess. And as like, I guess my personal side would be, I moved 6 hours away from where I grew up and where my family farms. I'm the youngest of 3 children, and the third youngest, I think, of 10 grandkids, and I'm the only one in agriculture, even though there was many of us that grew up on our farm. And my dad farms with his brother, so he had 3 kids, and then he farms with his second cousin, I guess, and he had some kids, and everybody, I guess, looked at me and just assumed that I would take the farm over. And first of all, that is a large burden to carry, and you feel like you're letting a lot of people down when you accidentally fall in love with a farmer 6 hours away and move away, and everybody's kind of giving you some looks at the family dinners.
But you're still in agriculture.
But I'm still in agriculture. People or my family has often joked that maybe I should get my pilot's license so I can fly between the farms. But I said,
Right.
if you fund it, I will do it. Build it and they will come type thing, right? So, so even though I'm not there to transition the farm to, and it's hard to see, I guess, the Seidel seed farm maybe come to a close in the next 5-10 years. Somebody, a very close family friend my age, is now getting the opportunity to farm our land. So the transition planning on my personal farm, or I guess my family farm, doesn't look like it's transitioning down to a family member, but it's transitioning down to somebody who wouldn't have the opportunity to grow their farm and, I guess, live out their dream without my dad's willingness to help that, I guess, to mentor him. So I've been a big advocate for transition planning not being just for family members. And that's not to say that I think farms should be easily passed down to some random kid in your hometown just to see your farm get farmed, I guess, your land be farmed. I think we have a duty as young farmers too to go out and search for those opportunities and make it known that we want to farm and we want to be here for future generations and then pass that farm on to our kids or to somebody else who wants that opportunity as well. So I think that's been an important shift in the idea of transition planning, and I'm excited to see that it's become more of an idea across, I guess, the generation above me.
Okay, thank you. What do you think about that, Lori?
Yeah, our situation's a little bit different because it's more of it's not just the farm, but it's also like the agribusinesses that are associated with that. So there's our crop inputs, fertilizer, seed business. There's a custom liming application business. So ours is more about business transition and not just farm transition. So, and like my own personal spin on that is that, when I decided to come home to the farm when I was finished up at the University of Guelph, and my dad was 48, Senator Robinson's father was 51. They were brothers. They each had 3 kids. There's 6 of us that are now this generation's the 6th generation owners of all of our businesses. And anyway, unfortunately, my first season, my father was killed in a car accident, and all of a sudden, myself and my 2 siblings owned 50% of an agribusiness that not all of us had expressed an interest in having, but all of a sudden we owned 50% of this business.
Right.
And with our cousins coming on, over the next generations, and like I say, now the 6 of us own these businesses, and now there's 10 in the next generation, and now we've begun those conversations about, some of them work in the businesses, some of them don't. Some of them aren't really like interested in being farmers, and so now we've started those discussions again about as we transition the agribusiness into the next generation, how do we accomplish all of that, not just about farm succession, but as agribusiness succession. So it's, I'm not a big fan of slogans, and I'm not trying to run for any political party, but it's like, don't wait till it's too late. Like, it's never too early to start talking about, what the next generation is going to do and what they're going to be interested in, or what the generation after that is going to be interested in. We've been 3 decades when we were all 20, in our 20s when we became business owners. And now we're all in our mid 50s, early 60s, and with a next generation coming. And it's, it's important that we include them in the conversations, and to get, the tools available to you, whether it's financial planning, succession planning, whatever there is out there, because they are difficult conversations, and they are meant to be like one-on-one and then as a group. So, and it's, it's important to start all those discussions early, because certainly we weren't talking about that when we were in our 20s, and then all of a sudden we were in it.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Florence, there's a lot of young farmers, I think, who work with you. And so are you hearing similar sort of advice? Are people taking that advice, or what's your perspective on succession and supporting the next generation?
I think the challenges are mainly the same all across Canada. I mean, the cost of the lands, difficulties to access property. I've been with the young farmers in Quebec in till 10 years ago, and we're still fighting for the same things today. So I think we're going to repeat those again and again until we get this, I guess.
Quelle sorte de choses en particulier?
Avoir des programmes de financement qui soient adaptés, avoir accès à du capital
Ouais.
peut-être de façon plus structurée, de façon plus adéquate pour que la relève puisse s'implanter, s'installer dans un contexte économique qui est difficile, dans un contexte justement, comme je le disais, d'accès à la propriété qui n'est pas facile non plus. Il y a beaucoup d'enjeux qui touchent la relève. Puis je pense que ça sera toujours la beauté de la chose, c'est qu'on a des organisations pour les défendre, pour les mettre de l'avant. Je pense que c'est nécessaire d'avoir ces gens-là qui se battent pour que l'agriculture puisse demeurer. Otherwise, I agree with you too. I think it's never too soon to get like the beginning of something for planning. The process of succession and integration for us lasted 7 years, so it was long. When you're 20, you just want to get to the point where you're going to be like integrated, and finally you get there. And I think if you have to get the tools, and we talked about getting help, I think you have to surround yourself with good people in this process too. And tools exist, good people exist. You got to go find them, go ask them, and have the right people around you to get there.
Yeah, tools. I mean, tools, there are some tools out there. I mean, Chris, you're also a professor, right, in BC. I know you've done some work on farmland trusts. Do you see that as a tool that can support, young farmers breaking into the sector to build some equity, or to break down some of those barriers?
Yeah, I think that we have some barriers right now in Canada, in that our tax system assumes that the next generation of farmers are the children of current farmers. And I mean, as a farmer, I've done everything I can to give my kids opportunities. And that means that they may choose to not go into agriculture. I, I have a daughter who just started it in agriculture at the University of Saskatchewan, so that's exciting. But what she does with that, will remain to see. But I also teach a lot of students who would love to be in agriculture, and they don't quite see where that is yet. And so right now, if you sell your land below market value to someone else outside of your family, you pay capital gains on that. If you donate land to a land trust, you pay capital gains on the fair market value. So you're actually, it dissuades people from doing that. And we know there are people holding on to land because they want to see it farmed, but they don't know what mechanism will allow them to allow someone to take it over without their family or their estate getting a big tax bill at the end of the day. And so it seems like such a simple thing. Like if the assumption is that we have capital gains deferrals, if the land is passed within the family, the hope is that people will maximize that. So there shouldn't be a tax loss that is part of that assumption. So if we assume that when it's sold outside the family, that's a problem. And I think land trusts can step in and offer, some do it through easements, in that if you are able to sell to someone at a below market value, you would get a tax receipt for the difference between what you've sold and what the fair market value is. But also the land trust would then be there to guarantee that stipulations on the use of that land and the resale of that land would keep it affordable for farmers in the future. Or that that we could have a situation where more land trusts could take land in and make it available at an affordable cost. And I'll just say, like, I farm on land that's owned by a cooperative. It's 50 people who came together to purchase the land 30 years ago. It's worth $500,000 at that time. It's worth $11 million today. The land prices around me, $250,000 an acre. The Ministry of Agriculture in BC identified.
Sorry, did you say $250,000 an acre?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
The Ministry of Agriculture in BC identified about 15 years ago that $40,000 an acre was the point at which you could no longer pay for land by farming it. So we've blown way past that. And so, like, in my mind, if there are people like widows who still hold the land and they would love to donate it to make sure that someone can afford to continue farming, why don't we take advantage of that opportunity before it's too late and we just start losing this land?
Yeah.
Because we see estate homes going in, we see this land not being used. And land trusts just seem like such an obvious way to move forward in giving people succession options. Like when you're talking to your accountant, to your lawyer, that they say, oh, we could actually make this possible to transfer to someone who is going to continue farming it and who needs to see that at affordable. It's almost like setting a second market for land that is going to remain in production for producing food, like in BC's case, as opposed to becoming estate homes and so on. But I think we need to start thinking creatively. And I mean, the reality is as well, like 1 in 4 Canadians wasn't born in Canada. Like the future, our population is changing, and that's a huge opportunity to bring more people into agriculture. And yeah, my grandfather sold our farm when everyone went into town one day to make sure that no one in his family could ever farm again. He thought that was the solution, to make sure he saw no opportunity. That was on my dad's side. And on my mom's side, my mom and her brother still own the farm. And as far as they're concerned, I'm farming in the wrong province. But it is a question because they always saw opportunity in farming. And I think that despite everything we've talked about, like the floods, the fires, the drought, we're here because we see opportunity in the sector, and we're all creative people looking for solutions, and that's exciting.
That's a really positive note. With that, we're approaching time, but I did want to create a little bit of space if anybody from the audience wants to ask our wonderful panel is some questions. We've talked about a lot of different things here, so everything from market dynamics and succession planning. We've talked a little bit about the weather, obviously. So any questions? that Senator Robinson who's going to ask us a question?
Don't let her ask me any questions.
Go for it.
This on? Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay. So my question is not for Lori Robinson. My question is for Mackenzie.
Oh, I almost knew this was
Gotcha.
coming.
So we heard discussion about Bill S-230, our National Soil Health Strategy. And within that bill, there's talk about an advocate, the National Health Soils Advocate. And I was wondering what qualities you would like to see, what your opinion would be, what your advice would be, because in AgFo tomorrow, we are starting clause by clause. So I'd like your expert input on what we should be talking about when we talk about that.
Well, first of all, I'm definitely not an expert. Just have some experience and like to talk. So, I guess I guess I would say qualities for somebody who's an advocate is they're not afraid to answer questions. You know, there's a lot of people, and the more I'm in front of crowds, the more comfortable I get. But it's almost scary to not know what somebody's going to ask you. So I guess somebody who can take the punches, I guess, and roll with them, especially in the topic of soil health, because I don't want to say it's new, but I would say it's definitely gaining popularity. So there's going to be a lot of questions around it. How do you get started? How do you comb through all the products that slap a soil health product on the front and say, throw this in the field, it'll fix all your problems? And that would be the second thing that the second quality that I think would be really helpful would be somebody who has hands-on experience with it. And that goes hand in hand with the first part of being able to answer questions, because people are a lot more comfortable taking advice from somebody who has experience in that field. So
not somebody who gets lost in a cornfield and can't get out of it then.
well,
No fault.
No.
With no,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess those would be the top two qualities that I would say would be very beneficial, if that answers your question.
Definitely. I'm wondering if any of the other panelists might have input and guidance for the AgFo committee as they go clause by clause through this.
Any other thoughts on this? It's pretty hard to follow Mackenzie's answer on that.
And Brody, you should stay with CFA. You should not apply to be the advocate.
I
You're
won't.
great.
Don't worry.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our panelists? Okay, if not, then let's give them a huge round of applause and a thank you. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much.